Welcome back to my channel. Now we have our torso that's been pretty well carved, mostly sanded, I'm sure we'll still do some tweaking. We have our round holes in the legs. Now we're going to be working on the arms, and we have to shape the arms, and then we're going to attach them to this area and then saw them right back off. So that's what this video will be about. So we have these, basically there's like long graduated tubes of clay wrapped around styrofoam that are the arms, and we have to shape them into something that looks like a human. So basically what you want to think about here is mostly the shoulder area being a little bit more bulgy, and the elbow area where you have the indentation and in the curve of the arm, and then the elbow pooching out just a tiny bit. Now what I'm doing right now is just opening up the top and the bottom and making sure that they're somewhat round, because we are going to eventually have to put balls in these things and string them. So I do have this mark where I want the elbow to be, and I have that on both arms. So that is going to be the inside of the arm, and that should be carved out a little bit so that it's indented. Now if you have to carve over the line, you can always just draw it back on. That's simple. And the wrist part will be much thinner, so we'll definitely be doing some sanding down there. Also, any areas on the clay that were imperfections, you can sort of scrape those off, and just be careful with the wrist area because that's pretty thin. I mean, I do want to try to make it as round as possible, but just be careful that you don't carve off too much, because then you'll have to make another arm. But the arm is probably the least sculpted in terms of details and just the overall shape, because you've only got this thin amount of clay that you can work with. So there's only so much carving you can do, honestly. But I did pull out some of the styrofoam at the top of the arm just to make it easier later. We'll have to cut the arm in two when we put the elbow joint in, but it'll be a little bit harder to get the styrofoam out at that point. So we're just carving away that inner part of the elbow that will be indented, and then on the opposite side we'll have the elbow that will actually protrude a little bit. So to mark that, I actually just made a little circle because I didn't want to get confused as to what was what. But the circle will be the elbow, so we'll carve above and below that and leave the center part sticking up as the elbow. Then when we do the sanding and smooth it all out, I think it'll look pretty normal. But this part of the arm will just be indented kind of all the way around, but more in the inside part than the outside. And then above the circle we'll do some carving, slight carving, to make it look like the elbow is protruding a little bit. It's just not a lot that you can do with this because of the thickness of the clay. But you can see I'm starting to thin out that inner part there and get a little bit of protrusion for the elbow part. Just do it slowly. You really want to go slowly with this because you could slip with your X-Acto and then you would probably carve off more than you wanted to. So you can either scrape or carve or sand depending on how much of the clay that you want to get off. But most of this video is about sanding. There was a whole lot of sanding going on here. But again, I'm just using those nail file sanding blocks. They really work well sanding this clay, and they do come in different coarseness, so you can pick up different sizes and use those depending on how much you want to take off as well. And there was a lot of, you can't really see it well in the video, but there were little dings and nicks from where I originally molded the clay, and I'm trying to get rid of those as well, because I mean, obviously we'll be doing some fine touch as we go along, but I want to do most of the sanding and the carving with these pieces separately because it's just so much easier to hold them and manipulate them. So at this point, I think we're ready to put the shoulder on. So I'm getting a little piece of clay, and I had to wet it just a little bit. And we're just going to make a cap on the top. And you want to make sure that you position it so that the shoulder part is on the side where the elbow is, and then the opening is on the side where the inner part of the arm is. So just make sure you keep that circle there where you will know where the elbow part is, and you can just, eyeball it from there. But be bad if you did it the opposite way. So the other thing to remember is you got to keep that whole patent that's going to be open, because we will be stringing elastic through the doll arm, so you can't close that off. If you do, you could always carve it off, but it'd be easier. It's much easier to keep it open so you can kind of see where you're going from here. Now, I had actually already done the other arm off camera and let it dry, because I wanted to try to do this in a more timely manner, and every time I add clay to a new clay, I have to leave it overnight. So I am going to try to look at the other arm with this arm to see if it's about the right size. Remember, symmetry is going to be key to this doll. You want the arms to look the same. You want the holes to be the same size. You want everything to be symmetrical so that it's going to fit together and move properly. So occasionally you just want to look at the other arm versus this arm and just make sure that it's as similar as possible. You can sand down little places, but if it's way too big versus the other one, it's going to be hard to make it fit. So I've got the basic shape, and now I'm just carving out a little bit of the clay so there's not such a big glob in there, and making sure it's open on the inside as well. Be harder to carve out that inside if you get a big chunk of clay in there and let it dry. So once you feel like you have gotten it to where it's really similar, then we're going to have to let it dry overnight. But since the other arm is already dry, we're going to go ahead and use that one and attach it to the body. Again, just looking at it from all angles, trying to make sure they're similar size. Also similar length, so you want to keep it on that as well. Just opening up that wrist a little bit, making sure that's nice and sanded before I put it on. I do want to look at the wrist versus the other wrist to make sure they're about the same size, and that one is a little bit bigger, so I wanted to do a little bit more sanding on that, get them about the same size. It's interesting that these came out fairly close, though, I have to say. I was pretty happy with that, and it saves you a lot of time if you get them that way from the beginning, but a little bit here and there is not a big deal because you can always just sand it off. So preparing this one that's already dry now, we're going to go ahead and attach it to the body, and then we'll let that dry overnight before we proceed with sawing them off. Like I said, a whole lot of sanding in this video. But it's better to sand this as a single arm than to try to sand it after it's been attached to the doll. So try to get it as close as you want. Alright, so now we're going to try to attach it to the doll. We've got this shaped pretty well. We've got it pretty well sanded. And what I want to do is, first of all, I'm just going to look at it to see if I think I need to cut any off. I don't know, it seems a little oddly shaped to me, but I think it'll end up being okay once we put the ball on it. It seems like the shoulder is a little too protruding. But we're going to take a little break from sanding and carving it. I'm going to show you the ball situation here. So I found these balls on Amazon. I think they're 5/8 inch. They're not a half. But anyway, some of these I put clay around already. I think these will work for the hips and maybe even the knees with less clay, but they're going to be too big for like the shoulders and the elbows. So I found this confetti bucket, and every time I open it they go everywhere because they have static electricity. But these are all different sizes, but they were the smallest styrofoam balls I could find. And I think, between all the different sizes that are available in this box, we'll be able to use those for all the different joints. Now, when you're looking at the balls versus the joint, just remember you're going to have a coating of clay on it, so you have to use a much smaller ball than actually the size of the hole. So it's kind of nice if you look at it now, while you can see the clay around the joint, you could sort of see, okay, if I use this size and then I put clay around it, is it going to be about the right size to fit in the hole? Because it has to fit partially in the hole, not the whole ball, not the widest part of the ball, but the ends of the ball will have to fit inside each side of the joint. So I'm just picking through them right now. I want to try to pull out the sizes I think I'm going to need, because you'll need balls at the wrist that will go between the lower arm and the hand. You're going to need a ball at the elbow, a ball at the shoulder, a ball at the hip, a ball at the knee, and a ball at the foot. So based on that, I'm just going to pull all these out, and it just makes sure that I have these set aside, because while I'm waiting for clay to dry, I can always make some balls. Now I'm looking at the ankle. That's the end of the leg there. That's the ankle. And trying to size up how big a ball. The ball of the foot will actually be attached to the foot, but then it will stick up in the leg and attach to elastic so that the foot will be movable at the ankle. So I think the blue one looks pretty good for that. The hands will probably be the smallest one, because it will attach to the hand and then you'll be able to move the wrist. So I think I've pulled out all the different sizes I need. I'm going to try to close this back up without balls going everywhere. And then we'll just set these balls aside, and while I'm waiting, at some point I will put some clay on them. They're going to need a lot of sanding afterwards too, but we'll just put them over here for now. And let's go back and work on our doll thumb. So we're ready to attach the arm that was dry to the body. Now I'm actually making this clay a little wetter than usual, because I want it to almost be like a glue. And I'm going to put a string of it around the opening of the arm, and then we'll just push the arm onto the shoulder and spread the glue out. I put a little strip across the top because I thought I needed a little more strength up there. And then I'm just going to use the metal tool and spread out the clay as best I can. It's kind of hard to hold the arm in place while you're doing this, but if you press against the shoulder towards the body, works pretty well. Once you get it set on there, then it's easier to spread it out. But if you move the arm a lot after you've put the clay on it, it's just going to break the clay open because you don't have much strength in it with it wet like that. Now the picture showed it with the arm right against the hip, so that's how I'm doing this. And I'm not going to worry too much about under the arm because we can always sand that out later, but I am going to prop it up on that sanding block so that the arm doesn't, the weight of it doesn't fall off. All right, and with the magic of editing, I've waited overnight and put both arms on, and now we're ready to kind of sand down the areas around the shoulder where we put it on. But I wanted to just show you in the book. So this is how it looked with the arm on, and you know, they also give you the anatomical musculature and then how to cut it off. You're going to cut it off kind of at an angle. And so what you end up with is that angle between the shoulder and the arm where you put the ball. And that's where you'll have the joint, and it'll make it so that you can move. Hopefully this will work. It's an adventure. Anyway, I did spend a lot of time putting clay on balls, so now all my little tiny balls are covered of all different sizes, and I can set those aside for when we're ready to attach limbs to body or hands to arms or whatever. But at this point, I just want to do a little sanding and smooth out all the areas where we had to add clay to attach the arms, it's a little bit rough, even if I tried to spread it out a little bit. It's better to get it sanded before we cut it. Once it's sanded, then I would suggest that you use a marker for where you want the incision to be. Otherwise, you will probably cut it wrong or cut one side different from the other. Again, you want to try to make sure that you get the two sides the same. And also, when you get up to the top, go to the back of the doll and draw it. Don't try to draw it the back from the front. It will be crooked, trust me. Alright, so I'm doing this as best I can tell from how the book looks. I'm hoping I have this right. Now, I'm going to be using a coping saw. This is the thinnest blade saw I had around the house. Hopefully this is going to work. It's one I've used before in jewelry making, where I've sawed like thin sheets of metal and stuff, or wood. But to me, it seemed like the thinnest blade I had, so I'm hoping that it'll work. I couldn't really tell from the book. It just said use a saw. So it ended up that this worked pretty well. So we sawed it off, and actually sawed a little bit of the body off given the angle that we sawed it at. But that's fine, because we're going to end up cutting that open anyway, eventually, because we'll need to have an opening. Now, if you have a little uneven area like this where it kind of broke off before I finished cutting, that's fine. You can just saw that off with a straight edge, or just use the saw, or sand it. Anyway, once I had the arms cut off, I also realized that the area where it attached to the body looked a little bit larger, but I'll show you how I dealt with that. But for now, I just want to shape this a little bit. That picture that I showed you showed that there is a gap, an angle, so I want to cut this part of the arm shoulder off, and that will give us a place for the ball joint to be. Again, just using the coping saw with a thin blade. Those blades break pretty easy too, folks. Alright, so that looks pretty much like the book did. There's that gap, that angle. That's where the ball will be. So now I'm just going to do a little bit of carving and sanding to get the arm ready for the joint. Not to the final stage, but to get it as close as possible, because one of the things I'm doing here is making sure that the two sides are the same, both the doll openings, the arm opening in the arm and the one for the doll. So now I'm going to just go ahead and cut the other arm off. Since the other one seemed to work pretty well, we'll just go with this, and hopefully this will work well. I was going to say that those blades can break pretty easily, so you want to have some extras on hand when you're using them. They're pretty thin, and they do come in different sizes, different grit, bit. What you call the sawtooth, like different tooth sizes. I'm sure there's a technical name for that. Anyway. Now I'm just carving off some of the excess clay where I'd used to attach it, and then I'm carving out the inside so I can kind of tell how big the opening in the body needs to be, because they have to match. We don't want to really make the arm any bigger, so what we'll have to do is make the opening of the body smaller if we need to. But this will help us to get a visual idea. And and the other thing is, look at the two arms together. You want to have two nice round holes that are the same size. You could even measure them if you wanted to go to that length. But I always tend to eyeball things. So now I'm just kind of looking at the balls that I have and which one I think will work. I'm thinking that probably is a good one. I don't think I tried a smaller one, but that's too small. That's not going to work. So I think it's going to be probably like this this one size that I tried earlier. Yeah, like that. It doesn't have to go all the way in. It just needs to go almost to the middle of the ball. But still, I can carve out just a little bit more So trying to make them round instead of oval. Tend to be a little bit oval based on how I originally carved the arm and how it attached to the body. But I think it's important to get the arm part first, because once you get that, then you can hold it up against the body and sort of trace around it to see where you need to cut the opening for the armhole. So I'm looking at them together because we will want to use the same size balls. And then looking at this, you can see how big that area is, that flat area. It's much bigger than the opening of the shoulder on the arm. So what you can do is just sort of carve up around the edges and just try to make that flat part smaller. Now I didn't want to carve too much around the top of that flat area because I think the shoulders are the right level and position. So I'm mostly going front of the body, back of the body, and the underarm, and then just sand it. But the opening of the body should mostly match the opening of the arm. Otherwise, the ball that you use won't work because you'll have too much opening on the body. So it has to be the same ball, in other words. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, guys, we're coming to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some things. Next time on the video that I do, we'll be working on the doll's legs so that we can get them ready to have the ball attached to them. We won't need to attach them to the body like we did the arms, but we will be preparing them to put the ball in. So, thanks for watching. I hope you will subscribe, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks, and bye.